Oscar Piastri, we're nearly at the halfway point of the season. You're leading the championship. It looks like everything's going absolutely to plan so far. How's it been for you?
It's been a great year, definitely. I think going into this year, we kind of hoped we'd have a car that was capable of achieving these kind of results, but it's one thing hoping you've got that, and another thing actually putting that out into action. So it's been a great season so far. I think for me personally as well, I feel like I've taken a good step forward from last year and, really stepped up a level. So I've been enjoying it.
In any sport, there's always a conversation about whether it's better to be the team or driver or personality who's leading the championship and being chased, or the one doing the chasing. How have you found the pressure maybe of leading the championship at this stage?
I prefer leading it, obviously. The main place you want to lead it is at the end of the year, but I think generally, I've been in this position before in my junior career. I always kind of say that normally if you're leading a championship, it means you're doing something right. So I'm enjoying it. And I think, honestly, I'm just trying to go into every weekend, try and get the most out of that I can. And it's still very early in the year. So the championship picture is, looks nice when you look at it, but ultimately it can change very, very quickly. So I'm enjoying being the hunted, but just trying to get the most out of each weekend.
You mentioned your junior career here. Like all you guys on the grid, your whole career life leads up to these kind of moments, leading the championship, fighting for wins. Does it feel surreal at all? Because you just seem to be able to deal with whatever comes your way.
It does in some ways, but also feels familiar in others. I think, for myself, my run into Formula One was fighting for championships. And, we had kind of the first 6 months or so where, we definitely weren't fighting for championships or even points really, but we got back to competitive form pretty quickly. So for me now to be fighting for a championship again, yes, obviously the stakes are a bit higher. You're in the pinnacle of motorsport, but actually the day-to-day living it feels quite familiar from when I was in F3 and F2. So just trying to take it as a cliche, one race at a time, but ultimately maximizing what I can do each weekend because, there's no point worrying about Abu Dhabi right now. You just need to try and score the most points you can until you get there and see where you end up.
Now, I know in the media we always focus on the points, but you have a 61-point gap over Max Verstappen now. Christian Horner, after Austria, said it's looking like a two-horse race. Does it feel like that to you? Are you ready to kind of accept this between the two of you and Lando Norris?
I don't really want to rule it Max out. Obviously, the gap is quite big now, and I think our car has been very competitive. I think Austria was, in some ways, a pleasant surprise at how competitive we were. I think we expected to be strong, but not quite that strong. So if we can keep that going, then yes, I think it's looking good for a two-way battle. But again, the championship's still long. There's still, 13 races left. It's not an insurmountable gap by any means. So I'm not going to rule him out just yet.
And you've been up against Max a couple of times on track this year. I'm thinking Saudi Arabia, Miami, Imola as well. How tough is he a competitor when you're wheel to wheel with Max Verstappen?
Definitely tough. I think he's a driver that races extremely hard, pushes the boundaries well and truly in terms of what's acceptable. But I feel like for myself, I always try and toe that line as well. And try and always race people hard, fairly, but hard. And, ultimately he's a 4-time world champion for a reason. And one of those reasons is because he's very good at wheel-to-wheel battles. So I've definitely learnt a few things this year. I think held my own in a lot of cases. Learned a few lessons in some other cases. But no, he's a tough competitor, definitely. But that's what we're all here to do, race hard.
Now, this is Lando's home race. Not that you'd actually notice, considering some of the cheers you've been getting from the crowd behind you. But when you're on the grid this weekend at Silverstone, will that impact you at all? Or is it the case that visor goes down and you could be racing anywhere?
I think, once you got the helmet on, once the visor goes down, you kind of just get into that state of trying to drive, ultimately, and go out and do your best. And I think Silverstone's always been one of my favorite circuits of the year. It's also an incredible event, and the fans have always been quite nice to me, which has been nice. So it's a place I really enjoy, but ultimately once you get into the zone, it's another race. But outside of that, looking back on the weekend, the build up to the weekend like this, for example, it's definitely got a bit extra compared to a lot of races.
And we've seen the battle between you and Lando ebb and flow circuit to circuit. Is there such a thing now as a Oscar Piastri style circuit and a Lando Norris style circuit? Have you figured out where you have the advantage, he has the advantage?
I don't think it's as simple as that. I think it's more kind of, who is really on top of their game each weekend. And I think we both have different strengths and weaknesses, but they're not always the same strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes they chop and change between the two of us. And, ultimately, I think we both know that if we go into the weekend on top of our game, we've both got a very good chance of winning that weekend. So I don't think it's as simple as saying this is a Lando track, this is an Oscar track. I think we're, both different drivers, but we can both excel on any kind of track.
And when you do get out there and you're wheel to wheel, the rules are pretty simple, right? Don't collide. But do you feel yourself having to race Lando in a different way to, say, Max or George or any other of the drivers on the grid?
I don't think so. Obviously, you try and take a little bit more margin because we're in the same team, but at the same time, it's ultimately who I'm racing for a world championship this year. So you don't want to be too nice. But yeah, ultimately, rule number one is don't crash into each other. And I think, we've shown multiple times that we can race each other firmly but fair. And that's ultimately all we can ask for and all the team can ask for, I think. So it's going to be a tough battle. I'm sure there's going to be more entertainment. I think Austria was a pretty exciting first part of the race. So, maybe a few nervous faces on the pit wall, but I think there's plenty of trust amongst everyone.
Yeah, because management have been quite realistic about this. They said right at the start of the season, it's probably inevitable. At some point, the two cars are going to collide. There was Canada, but Lando held his hand up and took responsibility for that. But do you think there's kind of inevitable that something's going to happen before Abu Dhabi?
I'm not sure. I'm obviously not going to speak it into existence, but I think there's going to be more battles this year. And ultimately, there's no shying away from the stakes being big. So we're going to, if we are close to each other on track, we obviously want to beat each other. We know what's at stake. So, just because it's happened once doesn't mean that it won't happen again. But we're obviously going to try our absolute best to make sure that both cars finish the race and don't crash into each other. So it's a unique position, a tough balancing act. But I think we've taken a very realistic approach, as you said, being kind of open with what we expect, and I think the way we're managing it is faring well.
I think one thing that people have been particularly impressed with you this season is just how calm you're able to remain. I remember you saying a few rounds ago that there's a radio button for a reason. It works both ways. So do you also have moments in the cockpit where you're not so calm, but you just choose not to broadcast it to the world?
Definitely, yes. I think, I am quite a calm character, but I'm not emotionless. I do still have happy moments, angry moments, frustrated moments. But yeah, like I said, the radio can be opened and closed. So, you definitely I still have to control them. I put a lot of effort into that. I think it somewhat comes naturally for me as well. But, I definitely still have to, keep myself under control.
And we don't really know a huge amount about Oscar away from the track. So what's it like? I mean, you're a Richmond Tigers fan in AFL, right? I mean, do you get yourself like emotional around that, het up around that?
I try. Trying to follow sport. I'm not a huge English football fan, soccer fan in Australia. I've never really got into it, but trying to follow American sports and Australian sports from Europe, very, very difficult. So I try and tune in to some of the AFL games when I can. It's been a rough couple of seasons for Richmond at the moment, so it's a bit tough to watch at the moment, but I always try and follow it if I've got time. And same with American sports, the NBA. I've always enjoyed watching basketball. Definitely wouldn't have made it as a professional, and not just because of my height, but I try and watch some other sports when I can. I like sports in general. Obviously racing first and foremost, but anything competitive, I normally take a bit of an interest in.
So you played basketball when you were younger, did you? Or?
Participated, yeah. I'm not sure I would say I did a whole lot, but I played a bit. I played Aussie rules football as well before racing. Big cricket fan as well. So that was the one I could play in my off season from racing in Australia. So I played that one, into my teens, and still try and watch in the Australian summer as well. So that's probably the main one I followed.
If I can just bring you back to the championship, Formula One. At this stage of the season, what's the best approach? Do you use the championship situation as motivation, or do you block it out and just take it race by race?
I think both at different points. I think it definitely is a big sense of motivation. This is ultimately what every racing driver is trying to fight for in their career. Whether they're in karting at the moment or alongside me on the grid, that's what everyone wants to achieve. So I think for me, I've definitely embraced the challenge and the motivation from that. But it comes with pressure. There's no denying it. And, you do need to take moments away from the sport at times, and it can be frustrating at points. But I think definitely the biggest thing has been the motivation and, just being very fortunate to be in this position, because there's not many people in their life, and especially on the F1 grid, that they get this opportunity to fight for a world championship. So to have it in just my third year in the sport is an opportunity I'm really enjoying.
Okay, Oscar, best of luck this weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.